Welcome to District Command Central, your go-to source for the latest news and updates on the Washington Commanders. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a play. The story of Brandon Coleman's current situation with the Washington Commanders is one of those cases in the NFL that perfectly illustrates just how quickly fortunes can change for a young player trying to carve out his place in the league. The league itself is unforgiving, built on meritocracy, health, and opportunity. When all three don't align, careers can shift directions in the blink of an eye, and right now, Coleman is living through the kind of reality check that every young prospect dreads. Just over a year ago, he was seen as one of Washington's building blocks for the future. A third-round pick out of TCU, Coleman arrived with the profile of a high-upside interior lineman who had the physical tools and collegiate pedigree to develop into a starter. Instead, after just 4 weeks into the season, he's now a healthy scratch, forced to watch from the sidelines while others take his spot and run with it. The Commanders' Week 4 clash against the Atlanta Falcons already felt like a survival test given the number of injuries Dan Quinn's roster had to endure. The list of unavailable players was brutal. Jaden Daniels, Terry McLaurin, Percy Butler, Noah Brown, and John Bates were all declared out before the team even made final roster decisions. That left the coaching staff with very little wiggle room. They only needed to declare 2 additional inactives before kickoff, and those choices, under the circumstances, effectively made themselves. One of them was Preston Smith, a recent signing who is still working his way back into game shape. The other was Coleman, marking the second consecutive week he found himself left out of the lineup, despite being healthy and ready to go. For any player, especially one drafted to play a significant role so recently, that kind of signal from the coaching staff can sting in ways deeper than any physical injury. Coleman's benching wasn't supposed to be the story. Officially, offensive coordinator Cliff Kingsbury tried to frame the first demotion as injury-related, suggesting that Coleman wasn't 100% and that resting him was the smart call. But the NFL is a league where what you see on the field tells the truest story. In this case, Chris Paul stepped in at left guard when Coleman was sidelined and delivered the kind of performance that makes coaches take notice. Paul didn't just fill in, he excelled. He gave the offensive line stability, toughness, and energy, all traits that teams desperately crave in the trenches. Once a backup proves he can be trusted, it becomes harder and harder to justify returning to the original starter, even if that player was once seen as the future. For Coleman, the emergence of Paul has shifted his trajectory in a way he probably never anticipated. This is where the harshness of the NFL comes into play. Coaches will often talk about competition, about earning your spot every single week, and about how no job is guaranteed. Coleman is learning this lesson firsthand. The troubling part isn't simply that Paul is starting over him. It's that Coleman wasn't even given a backup role in Week 4. For a young offensive lineman in just his second season, losing that place in the rotation might be even more concerning than losing the starting job. It signals that, at least for now, he is sliding down the depth chart, and climbing back up will require more than just showing up at practice. It will require persistence, improvement, and maybe a little bit of good fortune in terms of injuries or performance fluctuations elsewhere on the roster. For Washington, the decision is also reflective of the current circumstances. Dan Quinn and his staff are navigating a roster riddled with injuries, and the last thing they can afford is to put players on the field who don't inspire confidence. With Sam Cosmi still sidelined, the Commanders have leaned on Andrew Wiley and Chris Paul as their guard tandem, and until something changes, there's little reason to believe Coleman will be slotted back into the lineup. It doesn't mean his career is finished, or even that his role in Washington is gone forever, but it does mean he's entering that precarious phase where every practice rep, every piece of film, and every opportunity to show improvement matters exponentially more than it did when he was still a fresh draftee. The NFL is full of cautionary tales about players who entered the league with talent but never found the right mix of opportunity and development. Coleman doesn't want to become another name on that list. He has the physical traits, size, strength, and athleticism that convinced Washington to use a third-round pick on him. What he needs now is to convince the coaching staff that those traits can translate into consistency on Sundays. That means cleaning up technique, playing with better leverage, and showing the kind of football IQ that allows linemen to anticipate rather than just react. It also means demonstrating resilience, because teams pay close attention to how young players handle adversity. Do they sulk and withdraw? Or do they double down on effort and show teammates that they can be counted on, even when things don't go their way? It's important to remember that Coleman is still just in his second season. Plenty of NFL linemen take time to develop before becoming reliable contributors. Sometimes, it takes a year or two in the weight room, in the film room, and in practice to refine the raw skill set into a polished professional game. Washington's coaching staff may still believe in his long-term potential, but they also can't afford to hand out opportunities based on draft status alone. The league is too competitive, the margins too thin, for loyalty to override performance. For Coleman, that's the biggest obstacle. He has to earn back trust in a system that prioritizes results above all else. Fans, of course, will interpret the situation in different ways. Some will argue that Coleman has been unfairly cast aside, that the team should be more patient with a player they invested a valuable pick in just last year. Others will point to Paul's performance and say the decision is obvious. Why fix what isn't broken? Both perspectives carry weight, but the reality is that this is the business side of football. Draft status gets you in the door, but staying in the room requires production. Coaches aren't interested in narratives. They're interested in who gives them the best chance to win today. Right now, that answer is Chris Paul, and that leaves Coleman as the odd man out. This entire saga underscores a broader truth about the NFL. Development isn't linear, and not every promising prospect finds his footing right away. For every star who bursts onto the scene, there are dozens of players who take years to fully settle into their role, or who never quite do. Coleman's story isn't written yet. He could fight his way back into the lineup, prove himself when the next opportunity arises, and solidify his place in Washington's plans. Or he could drift further down the depth chart, eventually becoming a cautionary example of potential that never translated into production. Which path unfolds will depend largely on how he responds to this setback. As for the Commanders, they're focused on survival in a season already marked by injuries and uncertainty. With Jaden Daniels, McLaurin, and several other key contributors sidelined, the team is juggling lineups and hoping to keep pace in a competitive NFC landscape. Coleman's absence, at least for now, doesn't register as a top concern compared to those stars, but internally, it represents a microcosm of what every NFL roster faces: tough decisions, brutal competition, and the constant balancing act of performance versus potential. In that environment, there's little room for error and less room for patience. Brandon Coleman's fall from grace isn't permanent, but it is a moment that defines careers. He's at a crossroads now, forced to either embrace the grind of proving himself all over again or risk fading into the background of Washington's plans. The Commanders may not need him today, but football seasons are long, and opportunities have a way of surfacing when least expected. The question is whether Coleman will be ready when that time comes. Because in the NFL, the window to make an impression is always short, and once it closes, it rarely opens again. If you're enjoying the coverage, make sure to smash that like button and drop a comment with your thoughts on the Commanders' latest moves. We want to hear from you. The latest murmur around the NFL has the league buzzing, and if it turns out to be true, it could reshape the immediate future of one of football's most intriguing franchises. According to whispers circulating from insiders close to the Washington Commanders, a dramatic clash erupted between new general manager Adam Peters and team owner Josh Harris over the fate of head coach Dan Quinn. The story, which for now remains more rumor than confirmed fact, paints a picture of a tense front office, big personalities colliding, and a franchise desperately trying to shed the shadow of its past by moving decisively into the future. What makes the rumor even juicier is the way Harris supposedly dismissed any attempt at backtracking or hesitation, allegedly snapping back at Peters with the sharp line, "No excuses, Dan Quinn is out." If this is even remotely accurate, then Washington is preparing for a major shakeup before Quinn has even had a chance to truly cement himself in the role. When Adam Peters was hired, the idea was clear. He was brought in to modernize the Commanders' front office, bringing with him the pedigree of a man who had learned from some of the league's smartest executives and built strong reputations for both his eye for talent and his steady hand in decision-making. Harris, fresh off completing the long and complicated purchase of the Commanders, wanted Peters to be the football brain while Harris focused on the broader organizational picture. But somewhere along the way, according to the whispers, things became strained. Dan Quinn, the respected defensive mind and former Falcons head coach, was seen as a safe, stabilizing hire when Washington was desperate for respectability. He brought leadership, a strong locker room presence, and the credibility of having once led a team to a Super Bowl. Yet, in this new era of football thinking, analytics-heavy, quarterback-centered, and relentlessly forward-looking, questions have grown louder about whether Quinn was the right man to spearhead Washington's bold reset. It's in that context that Peters reportedly demanded clarity from Harris. The general manager, by most accounts, wanted to know where things truly stood. Was the organization fully committed to Dan Quinn, or was the head coach on a short leash? Sources claim that Peters, known for his no-nonsense approach, pressed for answers because he felt the uncertainty was clouding decision-making in areas like roster construction and long-term strategy. For Peters, who prides himself on aligning coaching philosophy with front office vision, that lack of clarity was unacceptable. He supposedly pushed Harris hard, reminding him that time was being wasted and that every roster move needs to reflect a unified direction. Harris, however, appears to have snapped, frustrated with what he perceived as second-guessing, and delivered the bluntest of verdicts. No excuses, no delays. Dan Quinn was out of the picture. If that confrontation did occur, it speaks volumes about Harris's determination to put his own stamp on the team. Remember, this is an owner who only recently stepped into one of the most toxic franchise environments in all of sports, inheriting years of dysfunction, bad headlines, and a fan base battered by disappointment. Harris has built his reputation in sports ownership circles as someone who wants results quickly but is also highly pragmatic, a man who doesn't shy away from tough calls. For him, the chance to wipe the slate clean in Washington was the entire point of buying the team. So, when the rumor claims Harris was unflinching in cutting ties with Quinn, it fits a broader pattern, a man determined to avoid the kind of half measures and indecision that doomed his predecessors. On the other side of the story, though, the move feels stunningly abrupt. Dan Quinn was never seen as a flashy hire, but he was thought to be a stabilizer. He had built a reputation in Dallas as the architect of one of the league's fiercest defenses, and when Washington scooped him up, the assumption was that he would bring structure, discipline, and accountability to a roster that sorely needed it. To discard him so quickly would not only be shocking, but also risk alienating players who may have bought into Quinn's leadership. Furthermore, it raises questions about who actually has the final say in football matters. If Peters is supposed to be the brain behind the curtain, yet Harris is making impulsive decisions, then the Commanders could be staring down the same dysfunction they were desperate to escape. Yet, some voices close to the situation suggest this may have been Peters' play all along. There are those who believe Peters never fully backed the Quinn hire in the first place, that he saw it as more of an ownership-driven decision made to calm the waters after years of chaos. If that's true, then perhaps Peters' demand for clarity was less about confusion and more about forcing Harris's hand. By pushing hard for answers, Peters may have maneuvered Harris into making the call that Peters secretly wanted all along, removing Quinn so that the general manager could move forward with a coach more in line with his own vision. If that's the case, the fiery, no excuses response may have been more performative than spontaneous, a way for Harris to reassert authority while essentially giving Peters the green light to pursue his own man. The ripple effects of this rumor, whether accurate or not, are enormous. Washington is a team in transition, holding draft capital, cap space, and the chance to reset a narrative that has haunted them for decades. If Dan Quinn truly is out, then the Commanders are once again entering the unpredictable world of a coaching search, but this time with Peters' fingerprints all over the process. That would mean looking for someone innovative, perhaps from the offensive side of the ball, someone capable of developing a young quarterback and bringing Washington into the modern NFL arms race. Names like Ben Johnson, Bobby Slowick, or even younger college minds might be floated as replacements. The message would be clear. The Commanders aren't content with stability. They want innovation and long-term growth. Fans, of course, are divided. For some, the mere idea of Quinn being discarded so quickly feels reckless. They argue that stability is priceless, especially after the years of turmoil under previous ownership, and that Quinn deserved at least a fair shot to prove himself. Others, however, welcome the rumor as a sign of ambition. To them, Harris and Peters refusing to settle is exactly what Washington has lacked. They believe the only way to break the cycle of mediocrity is to be bold, to avoid clinging to safe choices, and to swing for the fences. Whether you see it as reckless or refreshing probably depends on how much faith you have in Peters' ability to identify and land the right replacement. As for Quinn, this rumor, if it holds weight, is a bitter pill. He has fought hard to rebuild his reputation after the painful collapse in Atlanta, reinventing himself as one of the league's premier defensive coordinators. To finally get another head coaching opportunity only to see it ripped away before it even fully began would be devastating. Yet, his resume remains strong, and there will always be demand for defensive minds of his caliber. If Washington does cut ties, it won't be long before another team, perhaps one with a defensive coordinator vacancy, comes calling. For now, this remains a swirling story of whispers, murmurs, and supposed quotes flying around NFL circles. Neither Harris nor Peters has gone on record to confirm or deny anything, and that leaves the rumor mill in overdrive. But one thing is clear: Washington is not the sleepy franchise it once was. Every decision is under the microscope, every rumor amplified by a fan base desperate for a new era, and every move weighed against the heavy baggage of the past. Whether Dan Quinn truly is out or whether this is just smoke without fire, the fact that such a rumor could even catch fire says everything about the volatility of the Commanders right now. Thanks for tuning into District Command Central. Make sure to subscribe and follow us for all the Commanders news you need. Until next time, keep the faith and hail to the Commanders.